Jackson, 573-851.
Mr. Jackson, my name is Cheryl Anansa. Mr. Alvin Roche seated to my left. Mrs. Bonnie Jackson is seated to my right. We're here for a revocation decision this morning. And I see that you have a parole revocation questionnaire in front of
Yes, ma'am.
you. Signature at the bottom of that page dated September 20. I can't tell, is that 27 or 29, 2022?
The witness signature is 27.
And yours is
It looks to be 24.
that your signature?
Yes, that's my signature.
Okay. So are you ready to proceed this morning for
Yes.
revocation? All right, so I'll read the allegations against you, sir, after which you'll enter a plea of guilty or not guilty. Then I'll turn it over to Mrs. Jackson because your case has been assigned to her. She'll take the lead on the interview.
Okay.
We do have with us today someone from the Public Defender's Office. We'd like for her to introduce herself to the record.
Good morning. My name is Miranda Morgan. I am Mr. Jackson's assigned attorney from the Public Defender's Office here in Orleans Parish, and I will be his witness for today.
Okay. And will you want to make a presentation at the onset after he enters his pleas, or can we go through the interview process first?
Whenever it pleases y'all, I could give it after the interview, or maybe at the onset actually would be better, I think.
Okay, well, we'll do the allegations and then we'll turn it over to you. And
Okay.
Ms. Jackson.
Thank you.
All right, so Mr. Jackson, you're accused of violating the conditions of your parole, specifically number 2. You failed to report and stay in contact with probation and parole and have been a warrant case since October 2nd, 2022. How do you plead to violating condition number 2?
Not guilty.
Condition number 3, you failed to be living at the address on your certificate of parole and failed to get permission from your parole officer before moving and have been a warrant case since October 2nd, 2020. How do you plead?
What year was that stated, ma'am?
Have been a warrant, it just says you failed to be living at the address on your certificate of release, failed to get permission from your parole officer before moving, and have been a warrant case since October 2nd, 2020.
Not guilty.
Right? Condition number 4, you failed to refrain from criminal activity as illustrated by your arrest on April 23rd, 2022 by Wiley Police Department in Texas and charged with evading arrest, unlawful carrying of a firearm by a convicted felon, failed to ID. How do you plead to violating condition number 4?
Not guilty.
Next is condition number 5. You failed to refrain from possession or having control of any firearms or dangerous weapons as illustrated by your arrest on April 23rd, 2022 by Wiley Police Department in Texas and charged with unlawful carrying of a firearm by a convicted felon. How do you plead?
Not guilty.
Next is condition number 6. You failed to provide probation and parole, proof of employment, and have been a warrant case since October 2nd. How do you plead?
Not guilty.
Condition number 7. You failed to promptly answer and provide truthful statements to probation and parole concerning your whereabouts and have been a warrant case since October 9th, 2020. How do you plead? Condition number 9, you failed to allow probation and parole to visit your residence and have been a warrant case since October 2nd. 2020. How do you plead? Guilty, not guilty? Lastly, condition number 10, you failed to keep your supervision fees with the state of Louisiana current And you currently owe $1,890 in arrears. How do you plead?
Guilty.
All right, Ms. Moore,
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I just want to say that Mr. Jackson takes full responsibility for his actions and hopes that the board will allow him to continue his parole to a successful termination at the end of his full term date. One of the ways Mr. Jackson is alleged to have violated the conditions of his parole is by failing to report and failing to live in the address of record. In response, Mr. Jackson and I wish to inform the board that the only reason he did move from this address of record on Columbus Street was for his own safety. Around that time, Mr. Jackson and his supervising agent lost communication. Mr. Jackson was the victim of gun violence directed at his home. 2 days in a row, shooters appeared at his home, fired upon his house and his family. And on the second occasion of the shooting, Mr. Jackson did suffer a gunshot wound to the leg. He was transported via ambulance services to UNC here in New Orleans, where he was treated for those gunshot wounds. In order to protect his safety and that of his family, he temporarily relocated to a residence in Metairie and took great efforts to protect that location of their new home for want of safety from the shooters previously mentioned. Within a few months, however, Mr. Jackson's family was no longer able to remain in that home, and Mr. Jackson did lose all stable housing. From approximately November 2020 until the time of his arrest in Texas on April 23rd, 2022, Mr. Jackson lived, as they say, from pillar to post, regularly moving between houses of his family members and friends as they were able to accommodate him. Because Mr. Jackson lacked stable housing for a single continuous address throughout the bulk of his supervision period, he did not remain in that same house of record and made it difficult for him to report or allow residents visits due to this lack of stable housing. Additionally, in response to the allegation that Mr. Jackson failed to maintain approved employment, we wish to inform the board that since his release from DOC custody in 2020, Mr. Jackson has held down a number of jobs. In the 2 years since the beginning of his parole, Mr. Jackson has been employed at Papa John's, where he was made a manager. He also obtained employment at KFC, located at 6009 Bullard Avenue, New Orleans, Louisiana. The TLC Linen Services, located on Montague Street in New Orleans. Napa Automotive Parts and Supplies, located at 3978 West Airline Highway, Reserve, Louisiana. And throughout the term of his employment periods, he also maintained employment with Global Staffing, which is a temp agency here in New Orleans that provides short-term hourly temp services so that we could maintain employment when he had extra shifts available or between times that he was employed at those various establishments. One of the other allegations listed is that Mr. Jackson left the state of Louisiana without prior authorization, evidenced by his arrest by Wiley PD in Collin County, Texas on April 23rd, 2022. To this, we'd like to provide the following information. Mr. Jackson left the state under unforeseen circumstances beyond his control. Mr. Jackson's eldest son of his 3 children, his 14-year-old Mr. Jerian, lives with his mother full-time in Collin County, Texas. However, for the 2 weeks prior to Mr. Jackson's arrest, Jerian came to visit Mr. Jackson in New Orleans, and the plan was originally for Mr. Jackson to drive up to Shreveport with his son and meet his mother in Shreveport, where she would then take him across the state line back to Collin County for the beginning of school after the Easter break. Now, on the day that they were intended to make that custody exchange, which was April 22nd, Jerian's mother made a last-minute phone call to Mr. Jackson that she was unable to meet him in Shreveport for the intended custody exchange. And at that time, Mr. Jackson felt that he had no other option but to cross the state line to return his son to his mother's custody and care in North Texas. This entire series of events occurred on April 22nd, 2022, which was a Friday. And Mr. Jackson's supervising officer, Agent Ann's son, is only available for contact on Tuesdays and Thursdays. as she has made clear on her voicemail, her emails, and any kind of calls that we make to the parole office, trying to get in touch with her. As she was only available on weekdays that were far beyond this time period when he needed to return his son, Mr. Jackson was of the belief and understanding that he would not be able to contact Agent Sun in sufficient time to return his son to his mother's custody as was required. Furthermore, Mr. Jackson was of the belief that he would be returning to the jurisdiction by the end of day on April 23rd, just the following day, in order to attend an interview that he had lined up here in New Orleans. However, that was the day that he was arrested in Collin County, which brings us to the alleged violation that Mr. Jackson engaged in criminal activity and was in possession or control of any firearms. The only basis for this allegation is Mr. Jackson's arrest in Collin County, Texas. However, that case has yet to be adjudicated, and to date, Mr. Jackson has not been convicted of any new criminal offenses, including the possession of a firearm. Therefore, Mr. Jackson remains innocent until proven guilty, and that he, against the allegations that he engaged in any new criminal activity or possessed any firearms. Furthermore, in regard to those allegations pending in Texas, the Collin County District Attorney's Office has shown no intent or expediency in its pursuit of the charges against Mr. Jackson. He remained in county custody there for 90 days without a bill of information being filed or any initiation of prosecution whatsoever until he was released to Orleans Parish under the Texas 90-day writ provision, which is basically the Texas equivalent of the 701 date here in Orleans or in Louisiana, excuse me, meaning that the lack of timely prosecution resulted in his release from custody. And furthermore, after speaking with Mr. Jackson's court-appointed attorney in Collin County, Mr. Alexander Fuller, I've learned that his attorney there anticipates that the state of Texas will have no choice but to dismiss the charges against Mr. Jackson for want of a speedy trial due to his custody here in Louisiana over the past several months. Additionally, this arrest is the basis for the allegation that Mr. Jackson violated the conditions of his parole by by failing to waive extradition to the state of Louisiana. This allegation is simply untrue. As I previously mentioned, Mr. Jackson was released under the 90-day writ provision. Upon his release from Texas custody, he did not challenge extradition to Louisiana. He did submit to the Louisiana jurisdiction and supervision and was transferred back to Orleans Parish. At no time did he ever attempt to challenge the state's jurisdiction or supervision over him. Mr. Jackson takes full responsibility for his failure to meet the technical requirements that are expected of him, and he intends to find housing with friends or family where he may reside long-term and continue to find employment with global staffing temp agency that he's worked with for the past 2 years. Additionally, he intends to comply fully with the expectations and requirement of this board, the Louisiana law, and that of his parole officer going forward. Bearing all this in mind, Mr. Chavez Jackson humbly requests that the parole board allow him to continue his parole to full term. Thank you.
And thank you, Mrs. Jackson.
Mr. Jackson, I've heard all of that. I don't find it particularly persuasive. Do you have a cell phone?
At this current moment, no, ma'am.
I don't mean when you were on the lam from probation and parole, did you have a cell phone?
Yes, I did, ma'am. And I also tried to call my parole officer, but she rarely answers the phone.
How many times did you go into the office?
I can't count.
They document that in the note.
Mhm.
You had only been out since January of 20. And by October 2nd of 20, they had already issued a warrant for you. The only reason that they were able to catch up with you is that you were arrested in Wiley, Texas.
To the best of my knowledge, ma'am, a warrant was flashed on me on April 7th of 2022, not October.
Well, where you were detained on that warrant The warrant was actually issued on October 2nd of 2020. Fine. But it doesn't make any difference. The point is you did absolutely nothing that you were supposed to do. You got out of prison, you blew this off. You made no real effort to comply with the conditions of your parole. I don't think you were interested in contacting your parole officer when you went to Wiley because you hadn't bothered to contact them at all before then.
I've called her on several occasions, man, where she does not answer. Even to this day, you can try to contact her yourself. Even now, if you try to contact
I'm not on parole. Not my job to contact her, it's your job. You know where the office stays. You know where the office is located. And you made no effort to contact her on her office days that can be documented because they make case notes. If there had been contact with her, then there would have been some indication. If you had gone into the office, there would have been some indication, but you just blew this off. And now you want to come in and tell us, well, I'm ready to comply. I'm not persuaded. That's all I have.
Okay. Mr. Jackson, is there anything you'd like to say to us?
yes. I'm sorry that Mrs. Jackson isn't persuaded with the knowledge that was presented to her today. I really do apologize for the fact that them untimely events happened and they put me on the spiraling out of control to where it was really unable for me to do as I should have been able to done. I mean, I know I have these somewhat flawed things that happened. Look, I'm not even going to try to sell you anything or try to make it sound good. Okay. Things happen. Things are subject to change in life. Under the circumstances, some things wasn't able to happen. Now, is it that I just didn't want to? No, that's not the case. I did my best and I did it diligently to not get in trouble and to stay in contact with the parole. I'm only asking for a second chance. Things may not seem in black and white, oh, they're good, but I can guarantee to the best of my ability that foregoing, it would be a whole lot better. I think everyone deserves a chance, a second chance in life, a second chance to correct their wrongs. And I just ask that the board grant mine. Thank you.
Ms. Morgan, anything else?
I just want to second what Mr. Jackson said. I think that he's now been incarcerated between Texas and Louisiana since April. He's had a lot of time to reflect on this, to go over the requirements of his parole with his parole officer and with me. I think he fully understands the expectations going forward and the seriousness of the consequences if he shouldn't comply. I think that he wants to provide for his 3 children. He wants to help support his family. He is desperate for a second chance. I do think that Mr. Jackson is an intelligent individual. I think he is a hardworking individual, which is evidenced by his ongoing employment during the term of his parole. Whether or not he kept that up to date in his file with the parole office, he did maintain employment and contact with his family members. Furthermore, he does actually suffer from a chronic lung condition that requires ongoing medical attention. I was not able to obtain those medical records to present to the board today. However, our medical experts from Orleans Parish, we have some fellows that work with the hospitals in town to represent our clients and advocate for them in their healthcare. And it's my understanding that Mr. Jackson's lung condition is deteriorating and does require ongoing attention that is, I believe, beyond the ability of the prison system or the parish jail to provide. He would need to see specialists on a regular basis, which would be expensive for the state and for the parish. However, that it is a life-threatening lung condition that requires a myriad of medications, regular chest exams, and x-rays. Furthermore,
Ma'am, why wouldn't you provide documentation of that?
I did try to find the documentation. I had our fellow work on that as well. We weren't able to pull the specific diagnosis information. And I apologize for not having that documentation.
All you have to do is sign a medical release.
May I
It's
answer?
not hard.
May I
It's
speak,
not
ma'am?
hard. No, sir, you cannot.
I apologize.
There's a reason that we should revoke, and yet there's no documentation. There's no documentation of anything that Mr. Jackson is alleged to have done. There's no documentation of this so-called employment. There's no documentation that he made any effort to contact probation. There is no documentation of any of the assertions that have been made in the hearing. And as an attorney, you should understand that proof is essential. And you offered none on behalf of Mr. Jackson.
Yes, I understand. I understand. And I apologize that we weren't able to provide any documentation or information to these effects. All I can do is make a representation as at this point as an officer of the court, based on who I've spoken to and who was willing to comply with me. However, none of the individuals that I spoke to, including his attorney from Texas or any former employers, were willing to come before the board today.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we are prepared and ready to vote. Mrs. Jackson.
All right, Mr. Jackson,
Yes, ma'am.
we all believe in second chances. You deserve it. You got a second chance when you were parole. You didn't have to serve your full, you got out on parole. That was your second chance. And you blew it. So my vote today, I find that you have violated condition 2, condition 3, condition 4, condition 5, condition 6, condition 7, condition 9, and condition 10 of your parole supervision, and I vote to revoke.
Mr. Rocha.
Madam Chairman, my vote is the same for the same reason.
And I also vote to revoke based on I find you guilty of violating all the alleged violations. So today, Mr. Jackson, your parole is being revoked.
Wow, Miranda Morgan. I hope that he did not pay her any money to represent her for his sake. Well, that's a public defender for you. She actually goes out on the limb to say that he has a serious medical condition, but then has zero proof for it. Then Miss Jackson rightfully reprimands her and says, "You need to know better." But here's where she actually went. Her response to that was, "Well, there are people in Texas, there are attorneys, and there are people, but they weren't willing to come today to the parole board." So she's defending herself by really furthermore screwing the credibility of her client. It's like, what do you, if you're a public defender and you can't take your job seriously, don't do it. That's really where my frustration is being held at. It's like, you're a public defender. If he really has a disease, then you really let him down, because, and he had a piece of paper there. I wonder what was on it. He was pulling it out of his pocket. Was it something that could have helped? Maybe. But you would think that he would have pointed it at the screen if it was. I don't believe that he has a. I think he just seemed like for him maybe he was panicking and tried to come up with some way to get out, and that was a Hail Mary. If he really has a disease, then yeah, it can't be that difficult. But then if you're his attorney and he can't prove to you that he has a disease, then don't say it. Don't ruin your record. Don't ruin your reputation in front of the panel and say something. And then just for doing the right thing, why would you lie? Like you don't need to lie on behalf of your client. And if you can't just get a record, it can't be that difficult. Like if he had if it's seriously that severe, a lung, there would be something, and then you're just too incompetent or too lazy to go find it. So either or, right? Either she's completely incompetent or she's just like doesn't care to lie and doesn't care about her reputation to bring that up to defend her. Don't bring it up because it's not going to help. Bizarre. She had a nice chair though. You can give her that. She knows how to sit on a nice attorney chair. Very nice leather finish there. Wow. Okay. Don't mess with Miss Jackson. That's the moral of the story. She will eat you out.